Welcome to the weekend edition of the Fast Five by Fear and Greed. I'm Michael Thompson, and hello, Sean Aylmer.
Hello, Michael.
Sean, on weekdays, it's all about the Fast Five, which is the top 5 business stories in 5 minutes. On the weekend, we still keep it to 5 minutes, but we do things a little bit differently. We pick out the biggest story of the week, the sleeper story, which is one that might be flying under the radar a little, the most remarkable story, and then our favourite story. So let's get into it. What was the biggest story of the week for you?
Recession or no recession, US, Australia, take your pick. This week we had the bosses of the central banks in both the US and Australia come out and say they didn't think a recession was likely in either country. Now, I know they're talking their book. What central banker wants to be the person who oversees the recession? But I find it comforting that we might not actually have one. The theory is that because inflation is so high, central banks will have to push up interest rates so much that they trigger a recession. But Jerome Powell from the US and the Reserve Bank's Philip Lowe this week said, don't think that's going to happen. The economy is the story of the week, the month, the year. Them saying no recession, great news.
Yeah, great news, big story. My biggest story of the week is really the craziness that we've seen over the last week, probably the last week and a half really, in cryptocurrencies. A lot of people have been wary of digital currencies because of their volatility and kind of concerns over the value underpinning them. Maybe they were right. A week ago, we saw Bitcoin plunge below $18,000 a unit. It peaked last year at almost 70,000. So that is quite a fall. Investors have been selling off hundreds of millions of dollars worth of the big currencies were sold in kind of 24-hour periods. Some exchanges froze redemption, so people couldn't get their money out. Really, there's a lot of pressure on the crypto space from inflation, rising interest rates, concerns about regulation, and the potential for central banks, for example, to bring out official digital currencies. There's been so much hype around crypto for so long, and maybe that's kind of what it is. Maybe there's a bit too much hype there. What's your most remarkable story, Sean?
Well, we're coming to the end of the financial year. It's in a few days' time. What's remarkable is what a crap year it's been. Let's get rid of fiscal year 2022. Research House Chant West estimates that the median growth fund of super funds, which has between 60 and 80% of money devoted to growth assets like shares, will end the year down 5%. The ASX 200 is off about 10% this financial year. Wall Street's off about 15%. Now, if those growth funds end up in negative territory, it would only be the 5th time in the last 30 years. What a crap year fiscal year 2022 has been for investors. Remarkable.
Okay, that is Sean Aylmer, one of the most respected business journalists in this country.
On this podcast.
What a crap year it's been. And that is the defining line of that story. I enjoy that. Look, for me, the most remarkable thing is the sum $15 trillion. This was my most remarkable story of the week. $15 trillion is Australia's national household wealth in the March quarter. I find that remarkable. It's gone up 35% or so in the last 2 years. There is a bit of a downside to this story, and that is that not everyone's sharing in the national wealth because most of the increase came from the surge in house prices. So if you don't own a place, you probably missed out. So it's a remarkable story because 15 trillion is a heck of a lot of money, but it's also just a reminder of how crazy the property market has been and how tough it is for those who are just trying to get their foot in the door.
Fair enough.
All right, let's move on to the sleeper story. So maybe one that's not getting the attention that it deserves. Sean, what did you think the sleeper story was this week?
Well, I'm hoping it's not a sleeper story. I fear it is, but I'm hoping it's not. An 11-month Western Australian inquiry into the mining industries recommended mining companies introduce background checks, an industry-wide register for sexual harassers, and limit alcohol on all FIFO, fly-in, fly-out sites. It found that sexual harassment within the state's FIFO industry was generally accepted or overlooked, and there's a culture of cover-up. The report calls for tougher punishment against perpetrators and greater efforts to prevent them from working at mine sites. It is a national disgrace that this is going on in the mining industry. I hope things change. I hope that this report adds to the weight of evidence that men and women are treated differently in the workplace, and I hope the future is different.
Yeah, completely agree with you on that one, Sean. Sleeper story for me this week is actually about tax reform. And because we actually saw it kind of starting this week, led by New South Wales as part of the state budget, Treasurer Matt Keane introduced the first steps towards abolishing stamp duty, which is really kind of one of the most inefficient taxes in this country. From next year, first home buyers will be able to opt into a scheme where the lump sum stamp duty charge is replaced by an annual land tax. Look, it's a sleeper story because it kind of sets a precedent. It has been talked about for a while, but for anyone outside of New South Wales living around the rest of the country, it may well be the case that New South Wales is the first and every other state in the rest of the country will follow in making this change. So I think it could be a sleeper that'll come up again down the track. Favourite story, Sean, what was it for you?
The United Australia Party, funded by Clive Palmer, spent $100 million on his election campaign and ended up with one Senate seat. Full stop. What about you?
That is a cracker. $100 million for one seat. Not the best return on investment, is it?
No, definitely not.
My favourite story is the return of the Airbus A380. I didn't think we'd ever see them back in the air again post-COVID because they're not particularly efficient. They're just so big. But they are an amazing aircraft. So news that they are returning to the skies. They've been parked up in deserts. It's just brilliant to see them coming back. Carriers expect 60% of the parked A380s to be back in the air by the end of the year. And I just love that story.
I agree. Hard to beat the A380 story. Any plane story is good.
Yeah, it sure is. There we go. 5 minutes and pretty much everything you need to know in the world of business. Thank you very much, Sean.
Thank you, Michael.
We'll be back on Monday morning with the top 5 business stories in 5 minutes. I'm Michael Thompson, and this is the Fast 5 by Fear and Greed.